And so they too cry out like the kings had cried out, alas, alas, the great city. Okay? What's being communicated here is this kind of the horror of what has happened. The great horror of what has taken place. Alas, alas, the great city that had been clothed in fine linen and purple and scarlet, adorned with jewels and with pearls. This had been the extravagance of Babylon. But, it's also, you think about this, first century, less than 1 in 5 people can read. So you have to hear this, and it's being read to you, right? So blessed is the one who reads this book aloud, and the people who hear the prophecy. All right, going back in chapter 1. Other than fine linen, right, these are the garments of the prostitute in chapter 17. Right? The purple and scarlet, the jewels and pearls, fine linen, of course, also respective or representing the wealth. They too, the merchants too, note that in 1 hour all this has taken place. All this wealth has been laid waste. It is coming suddenly. It will happen swiftly. So the kings mourn over the fall of Babylon. The merchants mourn over the fall of Babylon. And now, the seafarers, the shipmasters, right, all the people that are kind of involved in the shipping trade, right, helping the merchants out, helping the kings out. Here too, they're standing afar off, right? Nobody wants to be too close. They were involved in all of this, but now that the judgment's come, nowhere to be found, right? Standing afar off, standing separate, hoping to escape, trying to be aloof, away from the danger. But the shipmasters and the sailors have no place to bring their cargo. And if nobody buys your cargo, what happens to the price? Right? Nobody wants it. You're not going to get rich that way. So here is the destruction of their livelihood. So they too cry out as they saw the smoke of her burning. Weeping once more for what has been lost. Not because the height of the immorality, right? Their sins are heaped high as heaven. No, that's not the problem. The problem is, how am I going to make my livelihood now? And they ask, what city was like the great city? And so they're kind of seeing this destruction of the city, and they ask, well, what city was like the great city? But what it probably should echo in your mind as you're hearing these words being read to you is a phrase several chapters earlier where the inhabitants of the earth ask, who is like the beast? They're marveling over the beast, and they say, who is like the beast? Right? And now, what city was like the great city? Was like the great city. Right? Seems pretty good, but when you look at it from God's angle, right, what city was like the city? Right? And so the beast looked good, but the beast is going to be judged. The prostitute looked good, but the prostitute is going to be judged. And it is a time of great sorrow and mourning, right? They're throwing dust on their heads as an expression of their sorrow, the depth of their sorrow. But not out of guilt, not out of remorse, but of how terrible it is that they've lost their livelihood. And so they too cry out in great despair over the great city, right? Alas, alas, the great city. And again, weeping because the means of prosperity have gone, where all who had ships at sea grew rich by her wealth, right? They participated, they gained because Babylon was so interested in getting wealth and getting luxury, and the shipfarers benefited. But again, right, for the third time, in 1 hour, she has been laid waste. Think maybe God was trying to get through their minds that all of this was going to take place in 1 hour? That He wants those Christians who are tempted to compromise, to recognize that suddenly, swiftly, it's going to happen. If you don't come out, you're going to be caught up in it as well. And so in this middle section here, verses 9 through 19, it's been a lot of weeping, a lot of sorrow, a lot of mourning, when suddenly it says, rejoice. So the message of the kings and the merchants and the seafarers has been, oh, how horrible this is. What are we going to do now? How terrible it is that the great city has fallen. But the heavens are encouraged to rejoice. Quite a different mindset. Right? And so there's a difference of perspective. When looking at Babylon and the fall of Babylon, the earth dwellers are going to see it as this terrible calamity. But from the perspective of God, from the perspective of heaven, the swift action of God against Babylon should bring rejoicing. Not in the destruction, right? This isn't a sign of, oh, hey, great, everybody's been destroyed, but in the triumph of God and the victory God has achieved. And especially in recognizing that this is what God has done for those who have been asking God to act. And so we see here God answering the question from way back in chapter 6, how long, O Lord, holy and true, will you not judge and avenge our blood on those that inhabit the earth? Well, now He's doing it. God has sat as a judge against Babylon. He's called her to account. He's righteously condemned her, and He has executed the sentence. And so it is the justice of this that's celebrated, not the punishment, but that it is just. So now we turn to the last section of chapter 18, which again signals a change. Right? So we have the voices pronouncing judgment against Babylon at the beginning, the funeral dirge, the weeping and the mourning in the center, and now we have an angel throwing a stone. So a mighty angel, we've talked before, all angels are mighty. So something is specifically being emphasized here by saying this is a mighty angel. Right? Took up a stone like a great millstone and threw it into the sea. What's all this about? What is this angel doing by taking this huge stone and throwing it into the sea? It's not destroying Babylon. We've just seen the destruction of Babylon. So what's it doing? What was that? Okay, so it might be, the idea of the judgment of the sea, the connection with the shipping. What else might be going on here?
Should we be talking about the verse where it says, I think Paul says it, for those who teach, the false teachers, it would be the ones who lead the little children astray. It was hard for them to have the millstone and then thrown into the sea.
Jesus says about that. Yeah, possibly. Certainly that idea of destruction. Ultimately, I think that this is just kind of a dramatic right? The angel's using this to make a point, right? 'Cause, I mean, think about this. The stone the size of the millstone. Now, when's the last time anybody here milled grain? Me neither, right? So I have to go on what I've read, not from experience. But evidently these millstones, great millstones, would have required the use of a donkey to grind the grain, right? And would have weighed several tons. Right? So it's not like a little pebble he's throwing into the sea. He's taking this several-ton stone and throwing it into the sea to demonstrate this is what's going to happen to Babylon. Right? And so think about this huge stone going into the sea. Right? And so this is dramatizing what is getting ready to take place, right, from John's time. And so he says, right, with such violence, I mean, think of that huge stone cast into the sea. That's the violence enacted by Babylon will be exacted on it. And that's the violence that will throw down the great city of Babylon. And Babylon will be found no more. Babylon's end is complete. It's assured. It will happen, right, in 1 hour. And out of that, there are some, I don't want to say consequences, but there are different groups of people or ways in which this, you know, thinking of a stone being thrown into the sea, the ripple effect, right? And so that's kind of where we're going now. With violence is going to be thrown down, and then there's going to be ripples out of this. Specifically, the absence of people. So first, he notes, right, this angel notes that the sound of harpists and minstrels and of flautists and trumpeters will be heard in you no more. So, in saying this, what's going to be missing from Babylon when it is thrown down, based on this phrase? Okay, music usually demonstrates, right, happiness and celebration. Right? There's not going to be any more happiness or celebration. And that's reflected by the lack of music. There will be no artisans of any trade. What's represented here? All right, yeah, beauty or craftsmanship. And especially we think, okay, you know, Babylon's trade guilds have marginalized Christians, and so, you know, they're going to be gone, right? Because those Christians refused to sacrifice to the gods and the emperors, and so those craftsmen are going to be gone. So there's celebration, beauty's going to be missing. Not only that, this will affect domestic life as well. Right? The sound of the millstone will be heard in you no more. Right? You kind of think of the ceasing of food production. Right? There's a lot of consequences here out of all of this. The light of a lamp will shine in you no more. Right? So business is affected, entertainment is affected. Domestic life is affected, right? There's no lights on in the houses because everybody has left. And ultimately, there's going to be no more joy. Right? The voice of the bridegroom and the bride will be heard in you no more. Joy is going to be entirely absent. The domestic sphere affected. Beauty, craftsmanship, celebration. Because of Babylon's economic lifestyle. For the merchants were the magnates of the earth, magnates. And this is the result of the punishment. Here's the reading of the crimes in preparation for the sentencing. So the sentence is being read out. And particularly, right, we've seen the religious sins of Babylon in the false prophet telling people to worship the beast, worship the dragon. We've seen the political sins of Babylon in the persecution of Christians, and now we're seeing the economic sins of Babylon and their judgments. And so this wealth, the luxury, the greed. All the nations were deceived by your sorcery. And so the merchants, so there's economic exploitation, there's sorcery. Here too, probably a focus on spiritual sorcery. Right? I mean, certainly sorcery was practiced in first century Rome. Right? There were people that claimed to tell the future. There were people that claimed to provide magic charms and other things we would call sorcery, magic potions. But it probably has more to do with the spiritual sorcery that Babylon had bewitched people into thinking certain things. But ultimately, the biggest crime of Babylon was the persecution of God's people. In you was found the blood of prophets and of saints. That's the highest crime is waited for, is held till last. You economically exploited people, lived on luxury, you deceived people, but it's the persecution that brings Babylon to an end. And kind of this hyperbolic indictment, right? Babylon, Rome, was responsible for every person that was ever slain in the entire humanity, even in the first century, right? Because there's places that have never heard of Rome, in Native America, for example. Right? But this idea of, the death of the witnesses, and the death of all God's people is going to be enacted in judgment on Babylon. What questions, comments? All right. We'll go ahead and quit there today. Quit a little early. Pick up in Tuesday in chapter 19. Now, chapter 19, things will really start moving towards the end as Babylon has fallen, but now the beasts and the dragon are going to start receiving some of their punishment as well. So we'll pick up there on Tuesday.